Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. This is a special presentation by the Commoner Law Group. My name is Clint, and I'll be your host tonight. We're living in a time when people are waking up to the fact that so many laws have been passed that limit our rights and limit our ability to seek justice and have massive consequences for our rights and for our health. And we're surprised that we haven't learned about them before, and we really only come to find out about them oftentimes when it's too late. One such law is the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act of 2005, known simply as the PrEP Act. This act grants sweeping legal immunity to pharmaceutical companies and government officials for actions they take under so-called public health emergencies. For families harmed by medical interventions known under the law as covered countermeasures, this has meant being shut out of the courts, denied due process, and little or no recourse. Our guest tonight, James Roguski, is a researcher, a writer, and a tireless advocate who has been shining a light on the PrEP Act and building a movement to repeal it. He has recently launched a petition to Congress to overturn the PrEP Act to restore accountability, constitutional protections, and the rights of we the people. James has been at the forefront of documenting government overreach during declared emergencies such as the COVID-19 scare. And you may remember him from our many conversations over the years working to stop the World Health Organization from asserting its supposed authority over Americans during declared health emergencies. Tonight, he's going to help us understand both the unconstitutional nature of the PrEP Act, its truly evil provisions, and the solution that we the people have to stop further harm being caused by this legislation. We'll spend about an hour or so with James. He's going to break down the PrEP Act in plain English, what it does, why it's harmful, and what a repeal of this legislation could accomplish. After that, we'll open it up to Q&A from you. And finally, James will take us through the specific actions that we can take to support the repeal effort, starting with the petition. With that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to James Roguski.
I could talk for hours about this topic, but I'm going to try to keep it short and encourage everybody right now. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I would much rather leave this, what's generally scheduled to be an hour long, it may run over, session to answer everybody's questions. There's a lot of people on here who know a lot of things, about many things more than I do. And so getting a group conversation going is more important than me than hearing myself, go on and on about a topic that I'm, deep down the rabbit hole with. So I'll try to do, Clint, if this sounds like this works for you, a 15 or 20-minute overview. And then, I want to open it up to questions, and, maybe some of the questions will take up, more time than people might expect. So first off, what in the heck is the PrEP Act? Raise your hand if you've read the PrEP Act. Now, the problem is most people in the United States don't even know it exists, let alone read it. And so, my task firsthand, before we even really think about rejecting it or repealing it, is nobody's going to take any action unless they know what it is and what it did and how it may have impacted their lives. So, little tiny bit of history. If you go back to 9/11 and just gauge, the mood of the country, 24 years ago now, just about, people were afraid. Then the anthrax attacks happened, and then we're dealing with the Iraqi war. And interestingly enough, this is tied together with what happened in 2005. I think 4 days from now, it'll be 20 years exactly that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And so the Bush administration did a lousy job of handling that. And so Congress had a piece of legislation that they were working on, both the House and the Senate, for appropriations for the military and money for relief for the victims of Katrina. And there were two separate bills. So a week before Christmas, as Congress seems to like to do when everybody else is paying attention to the holidays and everything else under the sun, had a conference committee where they were trying to iron out the differences between the two bills. And they went to sleep late at night thinking that they had agreed to what they were going to vote on the coming week. And when they woke up the next morning, there was a turd in the punch bowl. The PrEP Act had been tacked on to the end of this appropriations and Katrina relief bill. And even, many well-known Democrats at the time said, hey, wait a minute. Number one, you broke the Senate and House rules of, how you go about adding something to a piece of legislation. And this is unconstitutional. They got a legal scholar to write up a paper very quickly and say, no, this is just wrong on every level. They were not able to get it out of the legislation, so they all voted for it. Because how could you not vote for Katrina relief? And so we've been stuck with this lousy piece of legislation for 20 years. For many of those years, it wasn't implemented. Obviously, we'll fast forward to COVID. There were things that happened in between. But the point with the PrEP Act is not that it really prepares anybody for anything. If you just read the first line of the PrEP Act, it's about providing liability protection from not just, money, but even lawsuits. A lawsuit cannot be brought. It prevents the bringing of a lawsuit, let alone the liability from the harm that may be caused. In my opinion, it violates the core fundamental concepts of the Constitution, dividing powers amongst the three branches of government, by giving unlimited, unchecked authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to make a declaration. Now, people get confused. He can declare in here that he thinks that there maybe at some point in the future, there could be an emergency. It's different than the declaration of a public health emergency under other laws. And he can say, these products are the ones that he has said can be used. They're covered countermeasures. And as long as the people that are named and the products that are named are what are used to deal with whatever ailment his declaration is made for, no one can be sued if any harm is caused by the products that are used. Well, it doesn't require FDA approval. It doesn't require emergency use authorization. If you really get down deep into it, one of the aspects of it, they call it a security countermeasure. As long as the Secretary of Health and Human Services believes that the product might get approved in 8 years, then you're all good to go. No clinical trials are needed, no testing, no data, no evidence whatsoever. It's just because the secretary says so. Now, the other way it violates the Constitution is and this is the one that got me, it just made my jaw drop when I read it, I don't know how many years ago. It says that no court, no federal court, no state court shall have subject matter jurisdiction over any declaration made by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And all he has to do is submit it to the Federal Register. And so when I saw that, it was a number of years ago, during COVID, I didn't see this back in 2005 when it happened. My jaw hit the floor and I'm like, well, that's the definition of tyranny. You give all power to one unelected official and you say you cannot question his decisions, his declarations in any court. Now, if you keep going forward and you look beyond just the Constitution and the separation of powers, you look at the First Amendment and the right to a redress of grievances, right to petition your government for redress of grievances. Well, one of the ways you do that is you try to take the secretary to court and argue with his declaration. Well, you can't do that. That'll get dismissed. The due process involved with any of the court cases and the Seventh Amendment right to a trial by jury, just thrown right out the window. But one of the other aspects of it is it very clearly preempts any conflicting state law. And so take the Ninth and 10th Amendment and just shred them if you want to accept this repeal act, which I don't. And so there's at least 5 amendments where the rights that they are supposed to guarantee, this law is in clear violation of them. Now, the problem is when people are harmed by whatever treatments were provided, if they try to bring a lawsuit, and many people have, what they are greeted with is a motion to dismiss by the people they're bringing the lawsuit against. And most judges have just looked at that and said, get out of here. The PrEP Act says you can't bring a case. What a person would have to do is submit a claim to the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Plan, CICP, which, to summarize it, and we can talk for days about it, and Ray Flores just wrote an article about this, and many other people have. Only 39 claims have been paid out for COVID loss. Okay. A couple of really big claims got put out, but for the most part, the people who got claims only got a couple of $1,000s. But that's 39 claims out of well over 13,000 submissions, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who've been harmed. And so they even knew at the very beginning, back in 2005, that this CICP compensation plan program for people who are harmed was a joke. It wasn't properly funded, and you can't question it. At least with other compensation plans, there are ways that you can get discovery. You can actually put forth a reasonable case, to defend your right to get compensation. But this has been described as a star chamber methodology where people submit their claims. They don't really know who's adjudicating it. There's nothing that they can do. And it's frustrating as all heck for people. Not only have they been harmed by the hospitals or the doctors or the products, but they're harmed again by this system, which just abuses them all over again. And I'd like to ask Cece at some point to weigh in about what she knows about how all of that has happened. All of this together was very clearly spoken of in 2005 with relatively well-known members of the Senate and the House. The late Representative John Conyers spoke up and said very eloquently how this violated the Constitution. Senator Edward Kennedy, late Senator Edward Kennedy, is on record. And if you go to repealtheprepact.com and watch the very first video that's on that page, near the end of it, you'll see his impassioned speech, just going item by item how wrong this PrEP Act was and is. And even at the time, Senator Joe Biden and Senator Hillary Clinton said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. This is wrong. It should not be passed. But then they all voted for it. And so several months ago, I put together repealtheprepact.com. I've been under the awareness that this is, probably harder than climbing Mount Everest. I don't know, being a little bit facetious there. I realize that this is nearly impossible. But just because something is hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you feel is right. And, job number one is, if people don't know that the PrEP Act exists, they're not going to even have an opinion about it. if they know that the PrEP Act exists and they're informed about it, they read a summary of it, they watch a video about it, there comes a time, I know that I experienced this. I can remember the feeling as plain as day, the aha, epiphany, excuse my language, holy shit moment of this is just wrong. This is protecting not just the pharmaceutical companies, not just the makers of vaccines, but the distributors, the pharmacies, the pharmacists, the farm techs, the hospitals, the clinics, the urgent care facilities, doctors, nurses, even the media and anyone involved in the marketing and promotion of any of the products that are named cannot be sued for the harm that they cause. So, in very simple English, when a law protects and enables one special group of people to harm other people and get away with it, as Joe Biden said in 2005, scot-free, what alternative do we have but to demand that the current Congress, very few of or any of which were actually in Congress 20 years ago to vote for this, but some of them I think were, um, they have to make this right because this is, in my view, undeniably wrong. Law, the rule of law, is supposed to be, you set guidelines and they are applied to everyone. Well, this is clearly set up a special class in what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex, and they are given protections. And if people are harmed, you're not able to sue for the damages. You have to go through a compensation program that clearly is inadequate. Now, I want to make sure I get a couple of things so that people are very, very clear. This only applies to civil cases where someone might hire a lawyer and sue for damages. It does not impact criminal cases. The problem with criminal cases are prosecutors because people can't, you can file a complaint and you can try to move it along and you can petition or argue, with your district attorney, prosecuting attorney, attorney general, whomever, and many groups that we've talked to, some of the people maybe here, those things need to happen. But the problem is the prosecuting attorneys don't seem to have the stomach to take on that, what I call pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. Whether they're ill-informed or afraid, I don't know. But it hasn't happened. I don't, in my knowledge, there really hasn't been anything, and that's unfortunate. But the PrEP Act is about civil lawsuits. And I want to give credit to Aaron Siri. He was the first person to say, I'm going to try to do my rendition of it. He did an interview with Tucker Carlson. You can hear it in the video that's on the top of repealtheprepact.com. He said, hey, Tucker, let me explain this to you. Okay, I got a business proposition. We're starting up this company and we make something that, really it's kind of poisonous. And we inject it into people and we tell them that it's good for them and it'll prevent some mysterious ailment from something that you can't even see. But, we tell everybody it's out there. And don't worry because, our company can't be sued because there's this PrEP Act that says, as long as the Secretary of Health and Human Services has said we're good to go, nobody can sue us for any harm that these poisons cause. But wait a minute, it gets even better. The government is going to promote it for us, and not just the federal government, but all 50, state government health departments and county health departments. They're all going to say this is great. They're going to quite frankly lie. They're going to say that it's safe and effective, even though we don't need to do any studies. We don't need to do any clinical trials. We don't need to have it FDA approved. We don't need even to have an emergency use authorization. As long as the secretary says we're good to go, we're good to go. Can't sue us. But wait, it's even better. They're going to get the media to lie as well, and they're covered too. Everybody who touches this, not just the jabs, but the drugs and the devices and even the tests, all of these things are covered countermeasures. And so, we're going to get the government to buy these products from us and distribute them for free to unsuspecting people. Would you look at that business venture and think it was ethical? Would you think it could be profitable? And so, if you don't have any ethics, if you don't have any morals, if you don't care about the health of people, and you just want to make money, PrEP Act is great. But if you have an ounce of decency in your body, or your spirit, or your soul, or your heart, or your mind, anywhere, you got to look at this and say, this has got to go. Now, I've dedicated myself, I said, starting on May 3rd, I chose that day to launch repealtheprepact.com because it was 18 months, year and a half from the midterm elections for Congress on November 3rd of 2026. So we're down to almost about 14 months. May, June, July, almost August now. Spent 4 months, gotten nearly 4,000 people to sign the petition to repeal the PrEP Act. You can sign that petition if you haven't already. You can go to repealtheprepact.org. That'll take you right to the petition. But I encourage everybody to go to repealtheprepact.com. Read the darn thing. Read the summary, watch the videos, look through the information, look through all of the resources and graphics and documents and everything. And I'm sure Clint will put somewhere in the information here. Everywhere, all over the place with everything I do is my phone number, and I'll put it in the chat, 310-619-3055. Anybody who wants to put forth an effort to help repeal the PrEP Act, just let me know. We overcame one hurdle a little bit more than a month ago. Representative Thomas Massey submitted H.R. 4388, which, when you boil it all down, it can fit on one page, and it's the PrEP Repeal Act. H.R. 4388, PrEP Repeal Act. Encourage people to reach out to Thomas Massey and a couple of the co-sponsors and give him a phone call or send him an email and say thank you, okay? Because he had the guts to submit legislation that is the first step in the process. We need other members of Congress to sign on as co-sponsors. So if you contact your representative, your congressional representative, what you're actually asking them to do would really take them about 1 minute. All they would have to do is make the decision to sign on as a co-sponsor, tell one of their staff members, hey, add my name to the list. That wouldn't even take 30 seconds to give the instruction. So your ask should be very crisp, very clear to your congressperson. I want you to co-sponsor H.R. 4388, the PrEP Repeal Act, in order to repeal the PrEP Act. Now, for senators, it's a little bit different. We need senators to copy that and submit it into the Senate as companion legislation so it can go through both houses in parallel. A little bit different, but it wouldn't take a minute for a senator to instruct their staff to do that little tiny bit of paperwork. Then you got to ask yourself, if they haven't done it or they won't do it, how much money are they receiving from the pharmaceutical, hospital, emergency, industrial complex? How can they allow the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to be shredded by this piece of legislation? Well, maybe they're on the side of, following the money, not having the moral fortitude to do what's right. So My effort is still in the place of any kind of activism. As far as I'm concerned, step number one is awareness. If you haven't read the PrEP Act, please do so. I've tried to make it very easy. I've done a little 4-page summary. I've done videos, so forth and so on. Take this video when you get the link to the recording of it and share it with everybody you possibly can. You can always call me directly if you have any questions. I went over what I thought I was going to say. I was going to try to keep this to 15 minutes. I think I've been yakking for about 20 or so. Clint, let's open it up to questions. I'm happy to take questions, criticism, whatever.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much for that breakdown. What I love about the way you present is that you boil it down to the basic ethics of what it means, the very nature of what we call common law or natural law, which includes, yeah, if someone harms you, you should have a remedy. And that if we have government at all, it's to protect our rights and to give us an avenue to that very remedy. Yeah, it's not right to protect these people from having to have to be responsible for any harm that they cause. It's just not right. And I appreciate that. It's a very elemental point to make. So yeah, let's do some question and answer, folks, for about the PrEP Act itself. I myself have gotten confused between the PrEP Act and the 1986 childhood vaccine, and it also created a compensation program and some protections against liability. So the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program was created in 1986, and then the CICP was created as part of the PrEP Act.
Absolutely. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 should also be repealed. There's a separate piece of legislation. I support it fully. HR 4668. That primarily addresses, as you would think, childhood vaccinations. They have their own National Vaccine Injury Compensation Plan. So as not to confuse people, I stay focused on the PrEP Act, but that act also is an abomination. Now, where the PrEP Act goes further, okay? Now, I say this with trepidation because if I use the language that I really wanted to use, would have to censor me, okay? So take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt because it galls me to have to say this. At least with the Childhood Vaccine Act, things don't go on the schedule until they've been approved by the FDA. Okay, it disgusts me to even say that. With the PrEP Act, it's just a declaration by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. People are under some illusion. Products don't need to be FDA approved. They don't need to be emergency use authorized. There doesn't need to be any data. There doesn't need to be any clinical trials. There doesn't need to be a shred of evidence. If the Secretary of Health and Human Services says so, and quite frankly, he's even violated, not necessarily Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because he inherited all this crap. The way this was implemented, it literally says anything that doctors use, any device, any diagnostic, any vaccine, if you want to call those things that, any drug, they're covered. Okay. It's not just FDA approved vaccines that made it onto the childhood schedule. That's horrible. Okay. The PrEP Act is just insane. Okay. It's just beyond horrible. And so both of these things need to go away. I'm just trying to stay focused on the PrEP Act because, it's something that I think we actually can accomplish. And even if we fail, getting people to be aware that it even exists is job one. I'm going to venture to guess that 99.9% of everybody in the country have no idea that this is even an issue. And when they read it, they're likely to go, oh, Well, that explains a lot. Okay. It's not about the money in the sense that it's not the CARES Act. It's not, about the extra money and the bonuses and all of the, hundreds of thousands of dollars that hospitals got for each patient for putting them on a ventilator or remdesivir or whatever. It's not about the money. Okay. Money is tangential to all of this. The issue is that they knew that as long as they kept sticking swabs at people's noses and got a positive result on the fraudulent use of the PCR to claim that the people had COVID, they could do whatever they wanted and they couldn't sue people. And so I think Julie has a question, and then I'd like to put Cece on the spot and ask her to talk about, what she knows more about the hospital protocols that were covered by the PrEP Act. A lot of people focus on the quote unquote vaccines, rightfully so, but too many thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of people have not been forgotten, but they're on the edge of being forgotten by our country because they were harmed by just absolutely evil protocols in hospitals. So it goes far beyond just the vaccines.
All right, thank you. Yeah, if you folks have questions, please first type them and that's where we're going to go first. We're going to go with the questions in the chat first, and then we'll go to raised hands if we run out. So yeah, it looks like the vaccine injury program from 1986 is just broadly vaccines, and whereas the PrEP Act is specifically for emergencies. So then the next question I'd like to ask you, James, which is on everyone's mind, the PrEP Act does specify that there's a carve out, or if the pharmaceutical does something fraudulent, they can be held accountable. It's not a 100% blanket immunity.
Well, okay, fraud, if you were to bring a criminal charge, doesn't apply to criminal charges. So that's a whole nother ballgame. I'll leave it to other lawyers to talk about the criminal charges. The problem is getting a prosecutor to do that. Okay. Um, the way the PrEP Act is written, um, it's not, it's so bad. Okay. You can't sue a manufacturer for the harm unless an legal action or some other remedy has already occurred by either the Health and Human Services or the Justice Department, first bringing charges against the manufacturer. And then if they conclude that and have some type of penalty against them, then maybe you might have a chance to bring a civil case against them. It's an absolute abomination.
Very good. So it's a high bar, this quote unquote willful misconduct.
Correct.
Yeah, very high bar. I don't even know if has it even been
One one
tested?
case one case has been brought by Ray Flores, and it was in my humble opinion, the court mishandled it. He put in a type of appeal, and as far as I know, he's been waiting since October. I think that's correct. I might have the date wrong, but he's been waiting for quite some time because they botched it. They didn't even give him the proper access to a three-judge panel. You don't get a jury, okay? So right there, it still violates the Seventh Amendment. Um, but yeah, it makes it nearly impossible.
All right, when this was passed, initially the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, was captured. And maybe it still is, but times are changing, and we have this idea, we MAHA people, make America healthy again. We put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in that position as the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, a cabinet position in the executive branch. And considering that claims are adjudicated by the HHS itself, can we as Americans expect RFK Jr.'s policies to be more favorable to people who've been injured?
Well, you can expect all you want. I would prefer to judge based on action or the lack thereof. He's been in office, I believe, pushing 7 months now. That would have been plenty of time to do the things that he could do that I called out for, months and months and months ago. Let me address that though and make it very, very clear. Under the PrEP Act, the Secretary of Health and Human Services can make declarations. Going back to 2020, Alex Azar made the initial COVID-19 declaration under the PrEP Act. He made a number of amendments to the PrEP Act, and then enter Javier Becerra, who made another number of amendments to the PrEP Act. Separate from the PrEP Act, the Secretary of Health and Human Services has the authority to declare a public health emergency. A lot of times people get them all mixed up and confused. Well, the declaration of a public health emergency made by the Secretary of Health and Human Services lasts for 90 days. So, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. On May 11th, I believe it was 2023, so more than 2 years ago, they did not renew it. So at some point, Joe Biden off the cuff said, the pandemic's over. And so the the actual public health emergency has been over for 2 years. What we're dealing with these ongoing amendments to the PrEP Act declaration are not extensions of the state of emergency, but extensions on the liability protection for whatever they're doing under the declaration made back in 2020. And that's been extended to December 31st, 2029. And so, if you're trying to make sense of it, give it up, because it doesn't make any sense. It's evil. And if you're trying to use logic and reason and, make any kind of sense of this, if you put yourself in the perspective of people, there's probably millions of them in the country who are in the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex, and they stuck things up people's noses, or they hooked them up to devices like ventilators or oxygen concentrators, and they gave them drugs like midazolam or remdesivir, remdesivir, or they injected them with some unknown substance that may or may not change their genetic makeup and damage their immune system and cause myocarditis and sudden death and turbo cancer, not necessarily in that order. Anybody involved in that industry, and the media that lied about it, saying anybody who ever said that any of these at the time, if something was either emergency use authorized or not at all, if they said it was safe and effective, they lied. Okay, they're all covered. So there is a class of people in America who live and walk amongst you, who probably, if they sat down and thought about it, would thank their lucky stars that the PrEP Act is covering their ass from being sued, because that's exactly what it's doing. And so the medical profession and the pharmaceutical lobby, they probably don't want this bill to be repealed because it gives them license to commit murder. Now, you mentioned MAHA, right? A lot of people know about MAGA, Make America Great Again. A lot of people know about, MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. I'm promoting MACA, Make Murder a Crime Again. Get rid of the PrEP Act, because it's, technically, if you want to, nitpick, it's really hospital homicide. I think the vast majority of people in hospitals were not consciously trying to kill people, but when they caused harm, you can't touch them in a civil lawsuit. And that's just wrong.
Yes, and if in fact, I don't know if we know, but the PrEP Act was part of a huge omnibus legislative boondoggle that was passed right around Christmas time, that was about half a trillion dollars, almost $500 billion, which mostly funded the Department of Defense. Also had a lot of almost $40 billion for hurricane relief.
If you dig through the PrEP Act, you get into a section of, Biosecurities Act where what this was really originally designed to be was if a limited group of government personnel, military, maybe, medical support personnel, if there was some kind of biological warfare, and whether it was overseas in Iraq at the time, or if something happened here in the homeland, or wherever government employees would have to be sent into harm's way, it does, on a certain level, make sense to do what government could do to protect the government personnel that are being sent into harm's way. You don't send soldiers into warfare, into biological warfare, without the proper equipment, without some antidote or treatment or drugs or a vaccine if it was appropriate, whatever. But it was meant to be limited in scope. It was not really designed to be for the entire country. Okay, that the oh, it's an emergency, we're going off into battle, and the secretary has to make a really quick decision. So he's approving things. We got to have them for our personnel to go into battle. So you can't sue the company. Okay. And so essentially, the government is acting like a liability insurance provider. Okay. The government is saying, we're going to do this. We're going to make our personnel go into battle and do this. And we're going to cover the liability of the companies and the people who inject or prescribe or whatever. And on a limited basis, you might be able to make an argument for it. But when you expand it to the entire country and you realize how they've run the compensation plan, it's a classic insurance scam. We're promising to take care of anybody who's harmed. You can't sue, even though you've got, Seventh Amendment rights to trial by jury and, all the other amendments that are violated. You can't sue the companies or the pharmacies or the hospitals or the doctors. We'll take care of you. But then, as the essentially insurance provider for liability, the government just doesn't honor anybody's claims. They make it impossible to figure out how to file the claim, and they just reject everybody's claims. And they make it nearly impossible to even file the claim. You have to be seriously, seriously harmed. And so on one level, you really could look at this as it's not, but you could look at it as a big insurance fraud. They're just saying, no, you can't sue the person who's harming you. We'll cover you, but then they don't cover you.
All right, let's take Julie's question.
Hey, you
Go ahead,
guys. Hi,
Julie.
James. Hi, Cece. Thank you so much for the call. So, yeah, two questions I put into the chat. So, is there a list somewhere of these covered countermeasures? I mean, early on, we were given baricitinib and toxilimab and all these other things. I mean, or is it just whatever doctors are prescribing under the COVID banner?
Julie, I'm going to answer your question to the best of my ability. Okay. You're going to have a hard time finding it there, Clint. So thank you for bringing this up, because thank you, Clint. I did forget to mention this. This is not just COVID. There are current PrEP Act declarations for these things listed: acute radiation syndrome, anthrax, botulinum, COVID-19, Ebola, Marburg, nerve agents, and certain insecticides, pandemic influenza, smallpox, and Zika. Okay. So this is not just COVID. These are all active PrEP Act declarations. You get diagnosed with any of these things, you find yourself in the hospital, they're going to do whatever they do to you. And if they harm you, you can't sue them. Okay. Now, to answer your question, I did answer it in the talk, but it probably got, I was going too quick maybe. It's disgusting to me, because I think the intent of the PrEP Act was exactly what you're thinking, Julie. It was like, oh, this company's drug went through some preliminary trial and it looks like it's pretty good. And, we're going to cover it as a covered countermeasure. If you read the text of the PrEP Act Declaration, the 12th amendment to it, and all of them that I've been able to read say the same thing in terms of COVID. It doesn't define it. It says all devices, all drugs, or I should say it says any devices, any drugs, any diagnostics, any vaccines, they're covered. It's absolutely disgusting.
Well, I mean, certainly pandemic influenza makes me nervous, but also
Mhm.
like, what if somebody gets injured by ivermectin? That'll be kind of crazy. But so here's my second question. So my second question is, since Becerra in December, before he got booted out of office, extended this thing for 5 years, this declaration, and I'm glad you separated state of emergency versus this declaration, which is still confusing. But why can't Kennedy say, and I know he can't repeal the PrEP Act, but at least can't he say, whatever Becerra, said through 2029, I'm ending today, effective, September 1st. We're not going to have any more, coverage of these things under these programs through 2029. It's stopping today, and anything future I will declare as a separate thing. Can't he do that?
He absolutely has. Everything you said is just correct. Okay. He absolutely has, from day one in office, had the authority in the law to do that. Has he been given the go ahead to do that? And if given the go ahead, would he do it? Well, I don't speculate. It hasn't happened.
All right. Thanks for those questions, Julie. And next we'll go to Rick Martin. You had your hand up next, Rick. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question of James Roguski, our featured speaker tonight.
Hey, James, good to see you again, my friend.
Hi, Rick.
I'm sorry I've been out of touch. A lot going on, but you're doing great work. I'm just gonna applaud you on that. Now, the only thing that we have to keep in mind is government was created to protect the unalienable rights of we the people. You've heard me say this, but I'm just giving it to the audience tonight. Government was supposed to make life easier for us that were working the land and working this nation in the very beginning of our inception. Okay. We created legislature, we created representatives, and those representatives were supposed to go and protect those unalienable rights. Keep this in mind. All we wanted to do was protect our borders and protect our unalienable rights that were endowed to us by our Creator. Now, any act, and I don't like using court cases, but when we have to go back to case law, whatever happened to Marbury versus Madison? Okay, that's a very distinct case that everybody keeps wanting to throw out that has never been overturned. You go back to Marbury versus Madison, 1803, where Chief Justice John Marshall clearly stated any law. Now, how does a law become law? It has to be voted on by legislation. So, any law that is repugnant to the Constitution, so any act, anything that comes out of what comes out of DC or any state government that is repugnant to the Constitution is no law, has no force of law, and can be ignored. So why in the hell have we been going along to get along? Why have we, the people, have not taken our place in the big letters on the Constitution? The Constitution was a mandate to create a government because we're all supposed to be self-governing people. If we're all self-governing people, we know right from wrong, and those that do not know right from wrong, we created a government to take care of them because we want our rights protected. Okay?
Yes, Rick, thank you very much for underscoring that point. Yes, you're absolutely right, and every American needs to know that. And the Commoner Law Group, as you know, teaches these fundamental understandings of our relationship to government. Today, we're talking about the PrEP Act, which was passed in the legislation and is the authority upon which people are operating today. And James has done this valiant effort to demand our elected officials in Washington, D.C. repeal this horrible, horrible act. So let's go to the next question.
I know James from a previous interview, and I'm totally brand new here, but I'm going to join whatever your organization is because it sounds great. But and I
Well,
really,
first off, there's no organization to join. That's not how I roll. You know, feel free to call me anytime. The idea is to empower individual people around the country to do the things that, you know, you have every right in the world to do. So go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry. Keep going.
yeah, I didn't mean your group. I meant the common law group.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm feel like I don't know anything about law except, you know, it's interesting and I have ideas, but I'm not a lawyer and but that can be a good thing because I'm not full of what I can't do. Um, but so from what I understand from my question that Cece replied to is that I need to find my representatives and write them and encourage them to repeal this. Is that correct?
Write and call and nag, you know, mercilessly from now until the cows come home. Lisa, the best thing I can tell you to do is go to repealtheprepact.com. I'll put my phone number in the chat. I think we've actually spoken, and I've got you're in my phone, I'm pretty sure. You know, let's just talk, and we'll have an ongoing conversation. There's many ways I can help ease the learning curve for you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to tell you my ideas.
Go for it.
And but also I would like to like be in some sort of campaign to get my friends to understand what's happening and get them to write their representatives, like have letters ready for them and things like that. Like
All of those things can be found. It's all on Repeal the
okay,
Prepact,
great.
doing all that stuff. The starting point would be when you get the link to this recording from Clint and Commoner Law Group, you know, share this recording with people. It's as good an
Okay.
introduction as any. But yeah, reach out to me and we'll talk further. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so my other idea is I listened to Catherine Watt talk about this and she made it very understandable for me.
Good.
And from what I understand, when it was made, you know, during the holidays, that Hillary Clinton voted on it, some other famous senators, that they actually came out against it and called it unconstitutional. And as you say, voted for it anyway. Can't we call that treason or something? Or they're
Well,
traitors.
we can get into the legal definition of treason, you know, the vernacular, the common way that people talk about it. I think you would have to say, you know, they're disgusting, it's a conflict of interest and all that sort of stuff. Their actual words I have in a 4-page document, the 4 main people who spoke, Joe Biden, Ted Kennedy, John Conyers, and Hillary Clinton, they spoke eloquently against the PrEP Act. Okay, they are on record of it. And we need to use that. So if you send a letter to your congressperson, take that 4-page document, especially if your congressperson is a Democrat, and go, hey, the Democrats knew 20 years ago that this was wrong. Are you still going to stand by it and allow this to continue? It's a very simple thing. Take you a minute, Congressperson. Tell your staff member to sign on as a co-sponsor to HR 4388. If you don't do it, what does that mean? I think it was Julie who said, you know, look into how much money they've received from the pharmaceutical lobby. We have now a little bit more than 14 months to hold their feet to the fire. I know selections in this country are very corrupt. I get it. I understand it. But this needs to be an issue. If your congressperson who's in office is not on the list as a co-sponsor, you need to look around to see who's running against them and throw your, you know, find out if they would support it and throw your support, you know, against them. We need to use that as leverage to get them to do the right thing.
But the thing I feel like we need to like there's no meat behind that. Oh, you're going to be in trouble if you don't pay attention to
If
this.
you
If
remain
we haven't
silent,
gotten the people who actually were traitors to the US and the Constitution.
they voted for a piece of legislation that violated the Constitution. Unfortunately, the Constitution doesn't say, well, when Congress passes a law, it has to immediately go through some judicial review and it could be booted out right away. What unfortunately in our system is allowed to happen is people, by the millions can be harmed. And until somebody has enough money and enough gumption, and there are a couple of people, Aaron Siri and Jeff Childers, have court cases that are pending that raise the question of constitutional, whether or not this is constitutional. But the ideal thing that would happen is one of those court cases would magically find its way to the Supreme Court and they would come to their senses and they would strike it down. Okay. But that's not something that we, the people, really can control. It's our responsibility to raise our voices collectively, to demand from our representatives what we want them to do. If we don't demand it, we can't say, oh, they're not doing their job. We have to make it clear what we want them to do. If they refuse, then it's up to us to hold them accountable. Going after the people who voted for this 20 years ago for treason, unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. A lot of them are dead. Okay. And you're better off putting your energy to where you can do something. And the first thought you had was the right thought. Share this information with as many people as you possibly can. In my personal opinion, don't try to convince anybody to do anything other than read the damn PrEP Act. If you can read the PrEP Act, and I even highlighted it, if you go there, you can download the version, it's highlighted, you can see the sections that you want to pay attention to. If you can read the PrEP Act, and there's another little booklet, the 8 ways that it violates the Constitution. If you can read that and go, oh yeah, I'm cool with that, that's fine. And I don't mean you, I mean the person that you're talking to. If they're not up in arms, furious about this, then they are the traitors.
That's great.
Our own people who could read an act like the PrEP Act and not be up in arms with, this is horrible. How the hell is this a law? I've got to do something. What can you do? You talk to your congressperson to be a co-sponsor to get it off the books. At the moment, there's only three co-sponsors, Thomas Massey, Gosar, and I forget William's name in Ohio. What is wrong with all of the other congressperson? Well, the people across the country have to get informed. So step number 1, your very first thought, what can you do to help raise awareness of other people? Simple thing. Take the recording of this video, share it with other people. If they don't care, if they're not disgusted by the PrEP Act, then it's our fellow American citizens who are the problem. And that's where we have to start. You're not going to move Congress until you find enough allies who still have their heads screwed on straight and have some morals and ethics and some compassion to stand up and get in the face of their congressperson to make their congresspeople move. But it starts, as always, with the people. So thank you for being here.
All right. Looks like we have one more question, and yeah, we'll.
No, 2 more. I got 2 more.
Oh, 2 more? Oh, so I see 2 more. Yes, and then we'll finish up. And yeah, folks, this is a very, very much a campaign to repeal legislation, which means lobbying your elected officials directly and getting as many people as you can to do the same. Go ahead, John.
Hello, how you doing, James?
Hey, John, good to see you.
You too. I missed a lot of the beginning, like all of it.
You know it all already. You've heard it before.
I've actually not read a lot of the stuff that you're doing in terms of the logistics and tactical aspects of it. So I do hope that we can catch up sometime.
You know, you mentioned a military viewpoint to this months ago, and I wanted to talk to you about it. So whenever you have time, I know you're a busy man, by all means.
Oh, military. No, well, you call it military. Somebody just asked me about the UCMJ and how it applies to that. So I
Yeah,
thought you meant that. No, what he means is strategic planning. And
exactly.
yeah. Okay, so what was my question? It was Cece texted me and said you were talking about standing and right to petition, right to petition government for redress of grievances. Is that what did you mention that?
Well, I mentioned that that's certainly an aspect of it. It's a little, I mean, there's many ways that you can petition the government, but I will stop talking and let you have the floor. What's your question or point that you want to make?
Oh, I was wondering how if you've addressed that. I just did a presentation Friday, and I looked back through the history. There was a case in 2011 where both Scalia and Thomas they concurred, but with one objection of a point that was not at the floor, which was whether or not a lawsuit is a petition.
Mm-hmm.
And if you bring it as a lawsuit, um, a lot of the history of the right to petition, going back to the Magna Carta and stuff, it talks about Parliament and the King. It doesn't talk about petitioning courts.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a hang up there, all the way up to the top, where Thomas is still there. Scalia's gone,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll bet Thomas still feels that way. But anyway, what you're trying to do is great because you're going right to the legislature trying to get it repealed, and that would be the best, simplest, easiest way. They are getting paid a lot of money from pharma though. The other ways, and for people listening, is taking other vectors of attack in parallel. One being a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, you're going to the legislature. That's great. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. I hope you'll join us, John, in signing this petition. Like you said, in parallel. What do you think, James, after CC will go and we'll just walk people through the various actions they can take?
Sure.
All right. Hi, CC.
Hi, Cece Blakeman here. I'm the legal liaison and the media director for Former Feds Group. And I've been working against this PrEP Act for 5 years. And it's just been the biggest thorn in our side. We've documented probably 1,500 hospital protocol and vaccine injured stories, and none of them can get a case through because of the PrEP Act. Even if it's a civil case and we, our causes of action don't have anything that's a covered countermeasure, which is a military term, let's not all forget, like constructive fraud, battery, practicing medicine without a license, it's still all dismissed based on the PrEP Act. So, any diagnostic, any biologic, any procedure, anything used to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent, mitigate, anything to do with COVID, they're just going to blanket say PrEP Act. So it's really down, I guess this is more than a statement than a question, is it's going to come down to the people. Trump can't get rid of the PrEP Act. Kennedy can't get rid of the PrEP Act. It's got to be our Congress, our representatives getting an act of Congress. And so what we've been working together on is mobilizing people in all 435 districts across the country. So if we can get people in to sign the petition in certain, all those districts, then we can, assign a team leader or they can organize to go to their Congress, their representatives, and write them and call them and visit them and put political and public pressure on them, say, support this, this legislation, or we're not voting for you again. We have to vote these people out. So I would be not surprised if a lot of them didn't even know what the PrEP Act is. I mean, if you ask 9, 10 people on the street what it is, probably 10 out of 10, they're not going to know. So a lot of this comes down to public education. We have to, I don't care what letters after your name or whether you were affected by COVID or not, nobody in their right mind would agree to, that this is a good law to support. So public education, getting people to sign it so you can mobilize in your district to go to your representative and force them or try to convince them to sign this. And if they say no or push back, ask them why and say, we're writing this down, we're recording it. Can you send that to me in an email why you're still supporting this PrEP Act? Because if these vaccines or these drugs or these procedures were safe and effective, why do you need immunity? Get them on the record stating why they still support it, and then blast it out to that, that community. And say, well, we're going to work to get you out of here, and we're going to put somebody in here that doesn't support murder to be legal. The criminal suits, it doesn't have anything to do with that, but I will say that we've got 7 criminal briefs filed in 7 different states, and depending on the state and the penal code, you can go straight to the AG, or sometimes you have to go through the DAs and they have to refer it to the AG. But 2 of the 7 have picked up and open investigations. I can't say which states because they are open investigations, but that's good. But as far as the civil case, we had 126 filed at one point, and every one of them got dismissed based on PrEP Act. Most attorneys won't even listen to your case the minute you say COVID because of the PrEP Act, so they don't even get a chance. And so it's not, the people, having not tried to get attorneys. All of our victims have worked tirelessly along with myself to try to find attorneys. They just won't pick them up, and that's not their fault. And so statutes have expired, and there's a slight possibility if we can get this repealed that we can reinstate the statutes too. So because I'm telling all my victims, document every single attorney that turned you down based on PrEP Act, and that's 99.9% of them. We have a few brave attorneys, but they you can't blame them. They know that there's no pathway through right now with this unconstitutional law in place. And so it's just about getting the people, grassroots effort. I mean, we're an emotional species. You got to play on people's emotions. Would you be okay if your loved one was murdered and you had no recourse? I mean, it's not a left-right thing. It's a humanity thing. And it's going to come down to we the people getting involved in our legislation process again, which we have not done. And I'll land it there.
I'm going to pick up John Bowden's question from the chat. How's Jeff Childers' lawsuit coming along? I forget how long it was. Time flies. It may have already been 3 months ago. I actually got to sit in virtually on a Zoom call with a hearing that he had considering a motion to dismiss. We're all sworn to secrecy. We're not supposed to be able to say what happened there. And, the point was, it's been 3 months and I don't think he's gotten a word. So, there's this holding and waiting game. Jeff Childers brought a case in Florida for a number of people with, I think his was, I forget if it was React 19 or Moms for America, but he raised some constitutional issues that seemed to gain a little bit of traction. So there's a little tiny bit of hope that he may, proceed, but that's nowhere near the Supreme Court. That still in the starting stages. And I believe Aaron Siri has a case that I think is still pending in New Orleans. So in a perfect world, someone would bring a court case and make this happen. But let me look everybody in the eye here and state very clearly, y'all need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, have you been a thorn in the side of your representative and your senators to the extent of which you are capable of giving them a hard time? That's your and our and my and everybody here's responsibility. We can't complain that they're not doing the right thing until we have said to them very clearly, this is what we want you to do. And they have very clearly failed to do it. Now that starts with each and every one of us understanding what the problem is. Go to repealtheprepact.com and get very clear if you need a refresher on what we just talked about here today. All the information is there. There are tools that you can email or print out and hand to any staff member or representative or senator or whatever to make the case. There's a little 4-page summary. Thank you, Clint. You're right there on the spot. I've tried to summarize it in a little tiny newsletter. We have time in the sense that it's not like something's going to be happening next week. I'm not fear mongering that, oh, you got to hurry up and do this. But every moment you wait, another person is going into the hospital and being abused. Another child is being abused. I don't want to play on your emotions. I don't like that game. But that's what it seems to take. It's not until an individual person runs face first into the horror story of being abused by the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex that they finally find the fight in their gut to stand up for what is right. Stand up for what is right just because it's right, and do so to protect other people. Don't wait for it to happen to a loved one, or don't wait to allow it to happen to you. This act of Congress is clearly abhorrent to the Constitution. It's an abomination. It needs to go away. And I want to leave everybody with a very simple set of instructions so that everybody is very, very clear. Next person you talk to, don't try to convince them. There's no way you're going to have command of all these details. Ask them a simple question and then shut up. Okay? The question is, what's your opinion of the PrEP Act? See what they say. Listen. Stop talking. 99.9% of people will be like, I have no idea. Okay? Walk away. But log that in your memory banks. Next time you see him, ask him again, what's your opinion of the PrEP Act? You asked me that last time. I don't know. Would you like some information? Nah, I don't care. Okay, fine. Have a nice day. They're part of the problem. They don't have any curiosity. They just go along with what is being said. We're looking for allies, not trying to convince anybody. I don't ever try to convince anybody of anything. You ask them a question. What's your opinion? Fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be the PrEP Act. It could be anything else under the sun. They go, oh, anti-vaxxer. Hey, have a nice day. Next. Find people who are allies, properly inform them, get them connected into the network. That's what the purpose of the petition is. We've already got thousands of people around the country who have identified what state they live in, what district they live in, because this is all governed by congressional district, even though they're redistricting them in California and Texas. That's not going to matter until, next election, whenever. Your congressperson is your congressperson is your congressperson right now, and your senator is your senator. And so the point is, don't make this a battle with people who refuse to allow their morals to influence, their view of reality. If people think the PrEP Act is good, please give them my phone number. I want to have a conversation with them. I want to know how in the world they could possibly think that the PrEP Act is a good thing. Sick the hard cases on me. I'd love to have those conversations. They don't have a chance. But for you, learn what's there and just do a very simple thing, whether it's online, in person, email, phone call, text message, whatever. Hey, Bob, hey, Joe, hey, Mary, hey, Sue, hey, whatever the person's name is. I got a question for you. What's your opinion of the PrEP Act? And then shut up and sit and wait for an answer. Okay? If you get a good answer, share it with me. I'd love to hear what people have to say. If they ask for information, send them this video and tell them to go to repealtheprepact.com. If they come back and they go, oh, there's many things you can do. We're not going to go through all the details, but you can sign the petition, you can mail a letter to Congress, you can call your representative. But number 5 is the important one. Spread the word. Actually, number 1 is the important one. There's a whole list more beyond this for people who really want to take action. We won't bore you with all those details right now, but it starts with raising everyone's awareness. You can click on the button to sign the petition. The purpose of this petition, and if you scroll down a little bit more, Clint, anybody can download the latest version of the petition. I updated that about a week ago. Everybody who has signed the petition is listed in the petition. So you can see who's on our team. And if you know of somebody whose name is not on this petition, that's even more important. Who has signed it is wonderful, but who has not signed it is even more important. Okay. Now, the point of this is it's all organized by congressional district, and ideally, PrEP Act aside, what we need to do is get people better networked together by state and by district. So whatever comes up next year or next month or the year after that, if you're connected with people who agree that the PrEP Act is horrible, you've got yourself a group of people who at least have the morals and the ethics to stand up against something that is just such an abomination. You may not agree with them on everything, but what we need to come out of this is with an organization of like-minded people who are willing to at least put their name on the line and go, yeah, PrEP Act is ridiculous. It needs to go away. Then we can work together on making the world a better place in every other aspect that you can imagine. So Clint, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hopefully this was a good introduction to the topic, and my number's everywhere. If anybody wants to give me a phone call, as soon as we're done with this, I'll turn on my phone. Happy to continue the conversation anytime, anywhere with anybody.
Okay, great. Thank you too, James. A wonderful presentation as always, and a wonderful call to action. Once again, in the chat, you can find Repeal the prepact.com link. It'll take you to all of the resources you need that James has been talking about. Take action. We're going to follow up. Commoner Law Group will be following up with our audience. The video will be out. As James said, you can forward it on to others. And yeah, make some noise around this. This is how direct action and direct lobbying of your elected officials operates. This is how we do it. Once again, thanks everyone for being here. This has been a wonderful time together. We appreciate you very much, James. Your phone number is in the chat as well if you guys want to give James a call. All right, and look forward to more from the Commoner Law Group in the coming days. Have a great evening, everyone. God bless and goodbye.